Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Carell, founder of The Power of Our Story, Coffee and Conversation. And today we are celebrating our Independence Day, a little early. We are coming together in appreciation for the freedoms and strengths that we have. And we are doing this by having a veterans and first responders storytelling jam session. So it has been incredible. The power of our story really is about drawing people together, connecting, and we connect through our stories. It's a powerful thing to do that. And so we're building a community, we're building a place really of safety, so that our first responders and our veterans can really have a place to process their journey with people who understand. So today, I'm so thrilled to introduce you to some of the first responders, the law enforcement officers that we have all just grown to love. We are calling this "What Happens When the Ride of a Lifetime is Over?" And we've come up with this as we've talked about really some of the biggest issues that are happening with our law enforcement officers, especially just being able to process their journey in safety. Where do you go to do that? So we're talking about the challenges today of being able to process that journey and the transition of a law enforcement officer, and how to avoid isolation, how to find purpose and meaning, and to be reminded to still focus on earning your badge daily. And bottom line, you are not alone. This is a tribe that cares, and we have created a space of safety. So I am going to now introduce retired law enforcement and author of When That Day Comes, Chris Hoyer.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks. No, none of that. So really quick about me, I do some PowerPoint speaking. I've been all over the country doing this, and usually when I start these things, I always try to have a moment of silence for all of our fallen. So if you guys are willing to do that with me, just give me like a couple seconds, just a quick moment of silence. All right, excellent. Everybody good with that? So I will go back to myself and give you guys my quick story, but before that, I want to introduce Janet Wiszowaty from Canada, yay, or sorry. Super cool. And we got David over here, another colleague on the East Coast, New Jersey, right? So very cool. And then got Chris Gregorio up in the northwest part of the country. God bless those guys up there. I don't see Jeff McDonald, but hopefully he'll pop in pretty soon. Another veteran, super cool dude. So and everybody else that's here, I would just love to thank you guys all for being here and for the support. And last but not least, bottom right corner, my lovely girlfriend Natalie, who was gone for a week last week, and I just about lost my mind, but survived that somehow. So here we are. So if you guys have questions for me, if you want to throw them in the thing, or raise a hand, or just throw stuff, whatever works for you. I'm pretty well easy for the most part. So quick history about me. So I did 20 years and 64 days on the nose with Phoenix Police, and during that time I got involved with pretty heavy stuff. First shooting was my first year on, second shooting second year on, first rifle shooting in 2013, which was my third, and then ultimately my career-ending gunfight in 2016. That was an ambush, lost an officer. So needless to say, the stress was mounting through that my entire career up until when my buddy Dave Glasser was killed, and after that everything just kind of fell apart for me. Took me about 2 years of therapy and recovery, and I will do a really short intro to one of my best friends, Patrick, who I think is here down at the bottom. Him and I kind of we leaned on each other for a whole long list of issues that we still talk on a regular basis. Of course, he's still in Arizona, and I'm out here in San Diego. Sorry for all you guys. I know, Janet, you're hot up there in Canada, and it's a mere 71 degrees, I think, right now. So sorry about that. So, I learned about resiliency over the years, and I didn't really understand the dynamic of it until, it happened to me personally, with the loss of my good buddy and just all the other traumas that I had dealt with on my very limited basis at the time, which I didn't understand how that was supposed to be until, I got knocked on my rear end. And when that finally happened, I started to realize that, man, all those years I spent chasing bad guys and kicking in doors and having all the fun, I never paid attention or processed through all the bad stuff. And by the time it came time for me to call it quits, it was too late. I was already too far beyond the curve to recover, to maintain a healthy professional stance on my department. So I ended up calling it quits. But I know the whole point of this conversation is to talk about what we're doing now. And now I'm living my absolute, complete, total best life I ever have. Found the love of my life. That was a huge thing, of course. And moving out to my dream state, which is California, which I know is crazy because I think we're the only two people in the world that have ever moved to California. Everybody else is trying to get out of here, but that's a whole nother story. So, but the biggest thing that I did, short of actually just talking about stuff through recruits and some of the academies, post academies, and just people in general, was I'll get it for you. I actually wrote my book, and Natalie actually did the editing for me. And won't talk about that too much right now because I'm not trying to sales pitch that whatsoever. But the whole point is, writing that book was my number one source of therapy and healing for me. I'm kind of a proponent of not using the words what's what I'm trying to say here, closure. I don't like that word closure because there are things you're never going to forget. And with me, closure means that you've packed it away and it's gone forever. That's just not going to be the case, especially for me when you watch an officer get killed in front of your face. That's something you're not ever going to forget. It's just not going to happen. So, so for healing, that's what I like to use. So for me, again, the book was the number one way for me to heal myself. And to be honest with you, it wasn't ever going to be anything except for just for me. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And what I didn't realize was that over, pretty much a 2-year period of writing, it wasn't that, it was the 20 years of stuff beforehand that was all just coming back. And every time I wrote a new story, something else would spark, and I'd have to take a note and make sure I didn't forget that. And next thing you know, I've got, this entire thing is completely done. I've got another whole entire book that's all pretty much ready to go. And I have never felt better. And I love my department that I work for. Leaving there was probably the healthiest thing that I could do for myself overall, in addition to writing the book. So I think that's sort of it in a nutshell for the beginning stages. So we'll go with that for starters. So, Sarah, you look like you're dying to ask me something. So.
Oh no, I was just handing it over to you. Were you handing it back to me?
Yeah, absolutely. You know me, I'll just keep on chatting all day long. So you got to stop me in my tracks. So.
Oh, okay. No, awesome. Well, why don't we just go down the line? Maybe retired law enforcement officer David Berez, do you want to share about kind of your history?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I just want to first bounce off a couple things that Chris had said, which I thought were, and I'm a note taker as well, so I have my sticky notes all in front of my computer here. One of the things that you said, leaving the PD was the healthiest thing that you did for yourself, and I feel the same way about me. I grew up in the town that I worked in, and out here in New Jersey, things are a little different. That we have 535 municipalities in the state of New Jersey, which is a very small area. And each town has its own police department, and then each county has its own sheriff's department, and then there's all these other random PDs across the state. So there's, I think, almost 600 police departments in the state of New Jersey. So they're much smaller than some of the others may have dealing with or work for. But I love my department. I was part of the community. But Chris is 100% correct. Leaving was the best, healthiest thing I could have done for myself. So I just thought that was a very interesting statement you made, and I love that. So as far as my history goes, I was there 20 years and 4 days, not 24 days, and 20 years and 4 days. And I loved my job, every last minute of it. I was definitely not had the traumatic experiences in the way Chris did, but certainly experienced different levels of my own, between, you know, CPR on kids, hearing the screams of a parent when their child dies, and all the different stuff that we deal with as police officers. My own family tragedies in the process of that. And then when I retired, I think where things went south for me was I wasn't prepared for the transition. And I think that's one of the big things that we're here to talk about today, and have people express their own transition stories, which I always find I learn something from when I hear everybody's transition stories. I was ready to leave. I was ready to retire. I was ready to move on, right up until I realized I wasn't after I retired. So for me, processing 20 years of a law enforcement career and then 10 years as a volunteer EMT before that, starting when I was 16, there was a lot going on there. And the one piece I left out was being here in New Jersey. I was also a 9/11 rescuer. So September 11th, obviously right up to Manhattan, and we were there for an extended period of time. So that was at the earlier stages of my career. I was 2 years in at that point. So that was a lot for a young officer to absorb and understand. And that kind of changed the trajectory of my career. But so back to the transition piece, I wasn't prepared for what was going to go on in my own head as my own thoughts were going to unravel. So about 3 months into my retirement, when I found myself doing perimeter checks on my house at 3 a.m, I kind of felt like there was something wrong. And waking up in the middle of the night with nightmares, and my wife shaking me like, you know, what's going on with you? But what I had realized over a shorter period of time, as that all started to spiral out of control, was I had 20 years of things that I put in a box. That box was now open and overflowing. And no one ever talked to me about that. But as I opened up to other people, and it was like my buddy Joe, who retired the same day, I'd be like, Joe, this crap happening to you too? Like, what the hell's going on here? He's like, yeah, but don't say anything to anybody. They're gonna put you in the nut house. I was like, all right, I'll keep it to myself then. You and I can talk about it. And then as I reached out to a couple other people, I was like, did this ever happen to you when you retired? And they're like, oh yeah, dude, but don't say nothing to anybody, because they'll end up taking your guns out of your house, and they'll put you in a rubber room somewhere. I'm like, shit. So I kept trying to put it all back in the box again. And then, so that was like 6 months down the road. And then June 2020, one of my closest friends who lives in the town I grew up in town I live in now, sorry, he works for Trenton Police Department, which was a couple of towns over from where I worked. He ended up killing himself. I was out on a bike ride, and it's like 6:30 in the morning. My buddy Sean calls me and goes, Danny just blew his brains out. I'm like, what? And I just got off the phone with him that night before, and we were supposed to go out to lunch on Friday. He was having trouble at work. His wife was cheating on him. They were in the process of a divorce. And what I learned later, probably about 3 months after his suicide, was that his brother-in-law was over the night before and realized that Danny didn't pack anything in the house yet, and he was supposed to be moving out the next day. And nobody said anything. So like, everybody kind of puts stuff. So one thing we talk about, often is where, when somebody takes their own life in that way, the trickle down effect to the other people. And you also often get these copycat style suicides that follow an initial person. And that's what we started seeing with Trenton Police Department. So while I was trying to process all that on my own end, I reached out to another friend who is the chief resiliency officer for our county. So in New Jersey, we have a statewide resiliency program, which was instituted by the Attorney General's office. And we all know how government programs go for government employees. Always, best of intentions and never work out well. So my buddy Mike was like, why don't you come take the resiliency class? And that was the other thing that Chris said that really resonates with me, is that resiliency program and the idea of living a resilient life is so important. And unfortunately, so many of us don't realize that until our cup has overflowed, and it's hard to then battle back. But that's what we do best as cops, and we battle back. And you try to then change your lifestyle and hopefully get to a place where you can maintain that kind of status quo. So the resiliency program is awesome. But here in the state of New Jersey, the resiliency program was then overshadowed by, what they call now police reform. And they just passed a law through our attorney general and the governor, where they're going to go back 20 years to release everybody's internal affairs complaints. And if they're going to list everybody's name in a database that will be publicly accessible, and their home addresses and family members. So that way, if anybody wants to sue any of those people, they certainly can do that. And that law starts in the name of civil rights, blah, 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 blah. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes, but we're also seeing an uptick in self-inflicted injuries in New Jersey for law enforcement due to these policies. So while on one hand, they established this resiliency program, which is awesome, on the other hand, they try to really stick it to the guys and certainly their mental health, if nothing else. So that's kind of been my journey. And then as I was realizing that I needed my own help and like standard therapy wasn't really my thing, I actually reached out to one of Sarah's connections before knowing Sarah, which was John McCaskill, with all of his mindfulness and wellness stuff. And I didn't know John at all. I just saw what he was doing through his social media and through his websites. And I was like, hey, dude, how do I convert this into a law enforcement perspective? And how do I take this to the guys that are in my sphere, a geographical sphere here, and help these dudes out, because we got a mess. And he was like, I have no idea, I can't help you, but I know somebody that can. And he gave me Sarah's information, and I've been part of Sarah's groups, and the work that she does and the people she pulls together, all of you here are testaments to that. Even the faces and names that I'm not familiar with. This group of folks is unbelievable. And as I said from day one, this is the best therapy you can have without a $10 copay. And it's the tribe that Sarah's built and that we've all shared in is amazing. And to be part of such an operation organization, to me, is just so meaningful. And I hope that anything I contribute is certainly helpful to others, as I am able to learn so much from all of you. So thank you for that. And I love the topics that we have today, and we'll get into them more as as we break down the ideas. But talking to a retiree before you retire is so helpful. Planning financially is extremely helpful. So that's one less stress that you have in retirement. You're not constantly scrounging for what do I do next just for money, because in your second job should be about passion, and it shouldn't be about paying the bills. Your pension should be paying the bills, and your happiness should be, and your next job should be paying your happiness, is my opinion. And find a new mission. Mission's important. We're all mission-driven people. So once you retire from law enforcement, find a new mission, find a passion, and fulfill that. And then what we're all doing here is connect with a tribe. So it's so important. But as we've talked about, and it's on, as Sarah builds for the talks today, I always say that you have to continue to live up to your highest ideals and standards that you are required to do as a police officer, and earn your badge every day, no matter what you're doing. I don't care if you're working in a bike shop. I don't care if you're head of security for some major corporation. Continue to earn your badge every day with the same level of pride that you did when you had on a uniform and that flag on your shoulder. It's so important. I took that concept from the Navy SEAL Trident. I did not serve. I'm not a veteran, but their ethos is awesome. And those guys have to live up for the rest of their lives, live up to that Trident. That's their calling. And if they don't, even in retirement, they'll lose their Trident. So I think as police officers, we need to hold on to that concept and earn your badge every day. And when you stop earning your badge, even well into retirement, you've lost your way. You need to get help. So thank you for letting me ramble on, and we'll go on to the next one.
Can I jump in for a quick second on that? Sorry. Natalie pointed out something to me a couple months ago that was really profound, and it's kind of on the same lines of, because I decided I'm going to probably go back into the sheriff's department out here locally, which is just crazy. That's a whole other story too. But for the longest time, I swore I'd never put a uniform back on. And for all of you guys that have been through all some heavy stuff before, no matter what it was, she asked me a very profound question, which was, did you ever actually take off your uniform? And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, oh my God, you know what? Because I'm that guy, you know, I'm standing in the grocery store aisle, you know, playing Secret Service when she's shopping and stuff like that. And it gets into your blood and you can't let it go, you know, and it's very difficult when you leave, you know, Dave, I know, I guarantee you understand this, when you realize that, hey, there's something going on there, but I don't have a uniform. I don't have a radio. I don't have a vest. Nobody cares that I was a cop, because I'm not anymore. That was a little bit of a struggle for me in the very beginning. But then I realized, I'm like,
100%.
you know, crimes happen every day. I'm sorry, but we can't stop it all. So you transition out of that, you know, at some level, whatever that happens to be for you. Now for me, I decided that 20 years wasn't enough. So anyway, all right, I'm done chatting. So carry on.
It's interesting because, like in any other profession, it doesn't define you in the way that ours does. And I know this sounds pretty high and mighty, but I don't know that it truly is. What we do is a calling, like we had just talked about in the other call with Joe Landy. I'm not a religious guy, but what we do is a calling. Nobody gets into law enforcement because it's a cool job. You know, it's a tough business, and it truly is a higher calling. And it's not what we do, it's who we are. So it's hard to shed who you are, even when that uniform comes off. So I completely agree with you, Chris, and I think, and I do it too. I mean, you know, all this time later, I'm still, you know, sitting in the corner facing the door when we go to a restaurant. And you know, I can't have a window or door behind me. I'm always got the solid wall. You know, I get it. I'm there all the time. And I think that's a big part of that, because that's just how we're built. It's how we're trained, and it's in our DNA. So that uniform, while it defines you, it is who you are. You just have to find another way to grow that passion in a retirement phase, other than joining a new police department for your second career. Good for you. But yeah, no, it's important to live out your passion in the second phase that is not about paying the bills, but rather about paying your heart.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree.
Thank you both. That was really interesting, actually. Well, why don't we go over to now active duty canine handler Christopher Gregorio. Chris on the call? Maybe he.
Well, hello everybody.
There he is.
Back to follow. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. Great.
Thank you everybody for allowing me to be here. It's a tough act to follow. Chris and David, they're both so passionate about what they do, and they have so much to give. And they're two of the most selfless people I've ever come across. Although I've never met them in person, we've chatted over the last many months about things, and they're truly a selfless servant.
Chris, I hate to say this, but you're checking out. Oh, there you are.
That we've dealt with, so I won't really dive. Horrible internet. I'm sorry. Can you go to? Is there another person following me? And then if they can go, then I can try to get my Wi-Fi back up.
You bet. We can go to Janet, so that's fine. Yeah, we'll come back to you.
Sorry.
No worries at all. So next, let's go to retired dispatcher Janet Wiszowaty, married to a retired law enforcement officer and also author of The Year the World Paused. Janet.
Thank you. I love this group. I think it was serendipity, if you call it that I found Sarah. I live in Canada. I was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as a dispatcher, but first I was a spouse of an officer of a Mountie, a Canadian Mountie. So I have a couple of different experiences. One of being a spouse, and I had two little children, and my husband coming home, and I come home from work, and he yelled at me for something that I was upset about, which was totally unusual for him. And I didn't find out till 2.5 weeks later that he had attended a fire where 2 children had perished that were the same age as ours. So that's from the spousal point of view on how our spouses can take it when they're not involved, when they don't have an understanding, when they don't realize that in order to do your job, you have to departmentalize, you have to put you as a character away. My husband would phone me and he'd say, "Do you know so and so?" And I said, "No, but I know his wife." I said, "Why?" And he says, "Oh, he was killed tonight." "Okay, bye." And it was like, oh my God, what was that all about? So, then I started working for the RCMP, and it was like the shoe was on the other foot. My husband, I'd come home late and he'd say, "Did you put in for overtime?" And I'd go, "Voluntary overtime." Like how many times I had heard that. And then he'd call me and say, "It's lonely at home with nobody at home." And I'd say, "Well, welcome to my world." And then of course, as the years go, you deal with other things. And I think the start of my trauma and all that maybe was as a spouse, but was an officer I was very, very close to that committed suicide. And it's because of a file he'd been on, single male. And we had talked about the file, and he had told me that he couldn't rationalize in his head what had happened, the murder suicide of a child and a father. And 6 months later, he shot himself. And I think that was about 1986. And because of being in the RCMP, we moved a lot. We moved across the country. So we lived in the Lower Mainland, we lived in British Columbia, we lived in Toronto, and now we're in Alberta. And then other things happened, like police officers we worked with keep being shot and stuff. But I had no idea that the trauma had affected me. None at all. I had been in 4 car accidents, and the last one took me out for a year. And it was 2002, but it was 2003 when what I call the night the mask cracked. And David referred to that too, where things just came up. Like I had no idea. Like I had been injured to the point that I couldn't do anything. I didn't break anything, but lots of issues happened. And I was sitting in the dark one night just crying, wishing I died in that car accident. And all of these things were coming up. And it was like 7 years later when I wrote this piece, The Night the Mask Cracked, when I could finally understand it. But I knew enough. I needed help, and I found was referred to a psychologist. And I tell this to everybody: never ever work with someone you're not comfortable with, ever. I don't care who sent you there, whatever. If you are not comfortable with that person, nothing is going to change. And of course, this person wasn't for me, so I went on a journey to find someone that was. And fortunately for me, I did. But you guys have to remember, this was 2003. This is not when anybody was talking about, never mind for a dispatcher. They weren't talking about it for police. It was something that military went through. It was nothing that we would go through. And she right away says, "This has nothing to do with this car accident. This has everything to do with your job, cumulative PTSD." And so that's when my journey started. And she worked with me and gave me some great tools and got me to the point where she could say, "You don't have to work with me anymore." And that's when I panic struck in, because there was nobody there to help you move from where you were. When you work with someone to get rid of or to deal with that pain, or to put it where it belongs, and Chris, you said it too, there is no closure, but there can be acceptance and knowing that you did everything you could, and now it's okay, move on from it. And there's still times that things trigger, but we can get to that point. But we need, and I don't know, I think it was David said, your second job should be your passion and stuff. But what happens when you don't know what your passion is anymore, when you've lost it. And that's what happened to me when I didn't have fun anymore. I didn't even realize wasn't having fun anymore. I was raising grandchildren by this time. I was working 12-hour shifts, and then because the accident, healing and having doctor's appointments and all kinds of things. And we really need somebody to say, okay, now who do you want to be? Because we don't know who we want to be. We've forgotten why we did the things we did. We forgot about our childhood. We forgot about our passion. And so it was a long journey till 2010, 2011. I just took, courses one after the other, personal development. And then I trained with Jack Canfield on the success principles. And he's the Chicken Soup for the Soul co-author and wrote a book called The Success Principles. And that's when I started to find who I was. But it was a long journey. And so I call myself a now what coach, because when you get to that point, you need somebody to remind you that you have more in you to be something. And there certainly wasn't a group like this in 2003, 2004, 2005. I was able to go back to work. And what happened was in 2011, much like David, I knew it was time to leave, and Chris. And somebody said, well, stay longer, you can get a better pension. And I said, I'll die in the job. And I knew that would happen if I stayed. But I did stay. I didn't stay in the sense of full-time anymore. I came back as a relief operator. But as a relief operator, I called the terms. I, could choose, not always the hours. And then I did that for a few years. And then I contracted up in the Eastern Arctic, about 4 months out of every year. And you guys talk about how big your areas are. I know I sent Chris the pictures, but in Iqaluit, we dispatch for 23 or 26 detachments, communities, over 3 time zones. It's huge area. They're all fly-in. The smallest community is 187 people, and the largest community is 8,500. And most of them are 1,000 or less. And you're dealing with everything. Like, we had a shooting, another coworker and I, it was a member had to shoot somebody, and I've been on a couple of them, but her and I, it was us looking after everything. There were only 2 officers because most of the detachments only had 2 officers. And so I was on the phone with somebody that was able to be watching a Facebook Live of what was happening in the house, and so relaying the information so she could tell the officers what was happening. But in this, guys, remember, fly in only, it can take up to 12 hours to get help flown in. Like, we didn't have task forces ready. We had to arrange for a plane. Lots of times it had to come out of either Winnipeg or Ottawa, depending where, or Edmonton, depending where the situation was happening. And if the weather was bad, you couldn't get in. Like, we can hit 40, 50 below up there, depending on the weather. So what I'm saying is, I was able to resolve with myself and move forward. Doesn't mean that there aren't things that trigger. Driving down the road when I was off work one time, and on the radio, it talks about 3 of our officers that had been ambushed and killed. I worked with all of them. I heard about it on the public radio. We're not on the scene with you guys, but we're on the scene with you guys. Mentally, we were on the scene with you. And then it takes me to my husband, because he left angry. And it was like 10 years where he could hardly even talk about the people he worked with. And not one person that he worked with. And he didn't have the same camaraderie as sometimes you have with the smaller places, because we had lived in 4 provinces. So not all of the guys he worked with were even in the same provinces. And so he's in a much better place now. We're both in a much better place. And I just have to say that I'm very grateful for this group. And please, if you know anybody this is a place to talk. That's one thing that talking after the shooting, when we had a debriefing, the three of us that were at the debriefing, they processed two of them before. And it was phone call, like the psychologist had phoned in and we're just sitting around and we're looking at each other and we can hear the psychologist saying, I hear you. And we're just rolling our eyes. And then as soon as we're off the phone, we looked at each other and says, you want to go for coffee? And we went for coffee and we went for lunch and we went for supper because that's how we processed. And that's what we are here for each other. We don't need to talk about everything. We just know. And I guess that's it. I still contract, guys. I wasn't going to do it. And I just got a phone call from Whitehorse, just below Alaska there, you guys. And like any dispatch center, I'm sure you guys know too, that there's times that you're fully staffed, but probably for the blink of an eye, then all of a sudden they're not fully staffed. And but I did write a book or put it together, and it's all about how we process. It's powerful stories about 2020 and how these 20 other authors and myself went through 2020. And we just want people to know that you have something in you and it's okay to keep moving forward. It's okay to feel, it's okay to have loss. That happens, that's life, but it's not okay to give up.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Janet. So powerful. Wow. Why don't we go to Chris Gregorio and then let's just have a great discussion. So powerful. Thank you.
That was very deep, and that's one of the great things about this group. And before I start, Sarah, I can't see everybody. I'm on my phone. Does anybody have any questions or anything for the three folks that had gone before me? Does anybody want to comment or ask them any questions or anything before we continue on?
I got one quick thing for Janet. This is actually just for everybody, but since you touched on it about triggers, I'm not going to get into the whole thing what I learned about triggers, but what I did figure out was that I got sent home for about 7 weeks after my last really critical incident. And what I was doing was I was sitting at home creating my own triggers because I'd been through it before. I kind of expected certain things. And when those triggers came, I mean, the very first day I got back on the street, it was nothing like I thought it was going to be. Completely different than what I would ever have imagined. And that was a huge mistake on my part because when the actual trigger happened, it kind of caught me off guard because I was expecting something else. So my point is, if you're going through some kind of a traumatic event or you think you're going to be triggered someplace down the road, just let it happen naturally. Don't do what I did and don't try to create something that I know it's going to be this because this is what it was before, because that's not how it's going to be, pretty much guaranteed. So Chris.
And I just want to say that we have that power to know, okay, instead of saying this is never going to happen again, to say, okay, when it does, how am I going to handle it? Because we gain tools in our journey, whether we work with somebody or in reading. There's so much out there, and it's just accepting. Okay, like when somebody honks a horn at me and I start crying, why? What happened here? And okay, that happened. I'm safe. Okay, let's move on. But it's building those tools within yourself and having a support group you can call and talk to.
Anybody else? I think kind of dovetail somewhat on that is that, again, I've been with the Seattle Police Department. Well, I guess not again. I've been I work for the Seattle Police Department. I'm a K-9 officer. I'm going on my 18th year up in Seattle. I've been in the Army between active duty and reserve since 1995. I've probably legitimately seen and experienced everything that a human could, even though they probably shouldn't experience or see. And again, you guys have done a tremendous job talking about all the trauma and things like that. So I won't dive too much into that, other than to say that give yourself the grace and the acceptance to allow yourself to process these things. And I will tell you that there is no wrong way to process these things. You're going to go through, some people call them seasons, some people call them stages. You're going to go through things, joy, anger, sadness, rage, oddly enough, sometimes happiness, and understand that those things are all okay, because that's part of you going through that journey. And I guess kind of the last thing I'll say on that is that we're all warriors, whether you've been in law enforcement or military. We've all been warriors in giving of ourselves. And what I would beg of you, what I would implore of you is to allow yourself to be a warrior for yourself, because you deserve it. You've earned it. And that can be a really tough thing to deal with sometimes. What all of you give every single day to your communities, to your country, even though I don't know every single one of you, is a powerful thing to me, and it deeply affects me, because as we're about to embark on another birthday of America, as I was saying on an earlier call, from the earliest moments that I can remember at 5 or 6 years old, going to a baseball game and the national anthem being played and the goosebumps on my skin, even talking about it, the goosebumps are going. I have a pure love for this country. And with that pure love for this country is a pure love for all of our people. So that's all kind of speak to about the trauma. And I guess I'll speak a little bit more on that, like the transitional stuff. Chris has talked about being done, finding that final call, and one of the best things he could have done was to leave his department. Janet kind of said the same thing. David said the same thing. But here's what I would kind of argue to that. That's true. I give a lot of our young people advice when we're going through some issues as kind of a peer support guy or resilience guy. And I think sometimes the best advice we can give somebody is to walk away. It's okay to walk away, because sometimes we give so much of ourselves that we don't have anything left to give. It's okay to take a pause. It's okay to walk away full time and say, hey, I have to refill my gas tank. I have nothing more to give. And kind of the analogy that I give to that is, if somebody needed a ride and you had no gas in your car, are you able to help them right away? No, you're going to have to find some other way. You might have to call them an Uber. You might have to go make some money so that you can put some gas in your car to do it. But you can't help them in that moment. Sometimes you have to pass the buck. And guess what? That too is okay. You have to be okay with helping yourself and processing yourself and filling your gas tank back up before you can give anything else. If you don't have any food to give anybody, you can't help the hungry, right? So you got to make sure that you got food on your plate too, because otherwise you end up in these, the kind of the analogy I use is a black hole. You end up going down this spiral of a black hole, and they said that that's one of the most powerful things in the universe is a black hole. And that's negativity in our lives, right? It is really, really tough to pull yourself out of negativity. It's super easy to follow it. I don't know why, but it's super easy to fall into the negativity and very difficult to pull out of. But understand this, and I promise you this, you have the choice and you have the strength to pull yourself out of it. So I would actually implore that you actually are stronger than a black hole if you make that choice. And it's a very decisive choice. It's not easy. I've been down that black hole. I've been down that rabbit hole. And again, I think I've experienced about everything that you can. And frankly, I'm still processing things myself. And I still find myself trying to get sucked into that black hole until I talk to folks like you, and I'm like, you know what? My life's not that bad. Let me try to suck myself out of it. So they've made courageous decisions to walk away. But one thing that I don't think we think about, number one, when we walk away, there's a process to walking away. And I know that this is a law enforcement first responder / veterans type of audience. But I think this applies to anybody who has given so much of their lives to an organization, whether it be policing, whether it be fire. I don't care if you're a top 500 company. You give so much of your life and it's time to walk away. And let's say that you've done it with grace and respect and everything else, and it's your time to walk away. You're no longer part of that club. So you're losing something. You're losing something. And that's okay. But I think that sometimes we get wrapped up, and you'll hear some of the people in these talks say, well, F this place, I'm totally done with it because of this politics or those opinions or whatever. Frankly, I think that's a defense mechanism because you're so badly hurt about what's going on that it's easier to say that and walk away than it is to process the loss, right? After a 20-year or whatever, however many years your career you do in the military, you walk away, you've served your contract honorably and respectfully. Now you're walking away and it's still tough because you're giving something up. You're no longer part of the club. You're not going to platoon meetings. You're no longer going to stand out or stand to and processing. You're not going to lunch with the fellas and the brothers and sisters. And that's a tough pill to swallow. So there's part about this. And for me, it's kind of, it has a bad connotation because somewhat it is. It's a capital A word, and that A word's addiction. I am addicted to this life. I'll say it again. I'm addicted to this life. I'm addicted to service. I'm addicted to the adrenaline. I'm addicted to helping people, and sometimes to a fault. And I'll tell you what, all of you guys can probably resonate with this because your families pay the price. They do. And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes when you actually recognize that. It's a big kick in your gut. So, here we have, David saying he thought that he was ready to go until he left, and now he wanted to go back. You have Chris saying, well, I'm going back because of whatever the reasons are. Janet still contracts herself out. A large part of that is because in your soul, you still have more that you want to give. But I also ask you to think about this. Is there an addictive component to this? Right? I would say this. I walked away from the Army after almost 9 years of active duty service, and I was out for about 3 years, and it killed me. I went back in because I couldn't go to the PX or the commissary. How dumb is that? I never shopped at the PX or commissary, but just because I couldn't do it, I wanted to go back. I wanted to be part of the club. I had to have my privileges. I wanted to earn those things back, which goes very much to what David's saying. I don't think any one of us are entitled to anything. I think that we're entitled to certain opportunities that we've worked ourselves for, but you absolutely, and we all know this in your soul, you have to earn that spot every single day. You have to earn the right to wear that badge, not just with your coworkers, but yourself, your community, and everybody around you, because that's what brings the honor. That's what brings the integrity, and that's what brings the legitimacy to anything that we do. Feeling that you have to earn it, not that you've made your spot and it's entitled to me now. I'm here, I get to stay. Bullshit. Because mistakes of the heart, if you start lying, you start doing bad shit, you deserve to be gone. I'll tell you this, nobody hates a bad cop or more than a good cop. Because I'll tell you that I've had friends that are in prison for selling dope and running dope for the cartels and stuff like that. They were good friends of mine. Damn you. Damn you. You've made my job so difficult. You've made all of our jobs so much more difficult because you wanted to be greedy. And I'm not okay with that. So I ask you to look at yourself. Is there some, and as far as addiction goes, it's probably a healthier version of the addiction, if I may be so blunt to say that. It can be somewhat self-destructive, but so many more people get to benefit from that. Look, I don't drink excessively. I don't go and get drunk. I don't gamble. I don't go see hookers. I don't do drugs. But for me personally, how I keep my demons back, how I keep my bad dreams, yes, like all of us, I have bad dreams. I'm a broken, imperfect individual, just like all of you. But I'm okay to say that. I'm in a place that, I'll say God's given me the strength to let people know, hey, I fuck up. I'm not perfect. I go down my self-pity hole too. But to recognize those things, and nobody else is being hurt by these things, again, not doing drugs or any of these other things, but as far as part of your process, excuse me, consider the option that it may be some addictive issues, and that may require some conversation itself. And I'll tell you that these groups that you're a part of today, and I can only see a couple of you on my phone, so I apologize. This is the most powerful experience that you'll ever come across, and it doesn't cost anything. What Sarah and Tony and Papa Ron and Dave and Chris and Dave Weiner and all these people that I can say, and Janet, so selflessly give of themselves to let you know that it's okay. And I'm sorry, to correct me if I speak for you wrong, but it's okay to show your weaknesses, because we all have them. If you try to put on a front and say that you don't, I love you still, but you're fronting right now, and that's okay. But in this, and I hate the term, this safe space that you can kind of talk to with people with shared life experiences, it can deflate that balloon. Like many of you, I've lost many friends to suicide. Today, we're burying one of our cops that died, giving her herself selflessly in her off time when she got off her shift. She tried to help Alexi Harris, tried to help a trooper that was on a collision, and as soon as she got out of her car, she was hit and killed. And she's being buried today. So as we process all of these things and people that have lost, these conversations that we have, this is counseling, understand it. This is kind of our tribe, as David said and Chris has said and Tony said earlier. This is our tribe. But every time you find yourself and give yourself grace enough and you have the strength enough to talk about some things and understand it doesn't happen right away, you can come here and listen until you feel comfortable, until you trust, right? That's an earned thing. We have to earn your trust for you to be able to open your mouth. But I promise you'll get there and you'll feel that. But every time you feel like you're able to share, or even if you just come here to listen, you'll feel that balloon. As you feel like it's about ready to pop, it's slowly going to start to deflate. And I'll end on this. Through that process, if you're not saving your own life by processing, by learning other perspectives, by understanding this realm, I promise you that you'll take the information that you're going to help somebody else and you're going to save their lives. This is something that is a very new thing, but Sarah and all of you others are doing God's work and you're saving people's lives so selflessly. So as David said before, when you're done with one journey, the most important thing for you to go forward to help you through your process is you have to find a new purpose, a new goal that you're passionate about. And sometimes it might make you a hell of a lot more money. Sometimes it'll pay you almost nothing, but find what you love. And if it's helping people like so many of it is, look at Janet's volunteering on some things. David's volunteering because he wants to help people. And guess what? This is an easy way once a week, a couple times a day during this week, if you want, that you can help people. You're not going to be paid for it, but it will help fulfill you. I get so much fulfillment from all of you and being able to spill my guts in some ways. I get so much more out of it that I hope that I'm able to give back a fraction of what I get from all of you. And with that, I yield back. Thank you so much for the time, Sarah.
Wow, boy, power packed, isn't it? Oh my gosh.
I love listening to Chris. It's awesome.
Yeah, that was, I don't know, after all of you all sharing so deeply from the heart and from your life experience, would anybody feel alone, like they're the only one after hearing all of your stories? I'm so touched. I mean, I know you all now, but I'm so touched by hearing your stories again and what you shared today. So I would love to open it up for conversation. For those of you who have questions or even want to share your own journey or just some things that you're struggling with. Just before we go on, I do want to invite anybody who's seeing this. You are welcome here. If you are a first responder, a law enforcement officer, or a bridge builder who cares, come and be part of this and just bring who you are, because that will be helpful. So anyway, thank you all so much for sharing. I want to open it up now.
I just want to, before we do that, to the people that are not regulars with our group, I wanted to tap into something Chris said, which I thought was so important. Chris Gregorio, that is, be it not that Chris Gregorio doesn't say important stuff, but Chris Gregorio just had the awesomeness idea of expressing our job as an addiction. And it's so true. And I think through everybody's experiences, they could probably agree with that. And by that nature, we all likely have addictive personalities, and it's how you choose to feed that addiction. And the way Chris was just talking about it. So some of us refeed it through our jobs and going back to things that we thought were, toxic to us, but realizing that's what fulfilled us as well. And I think we need to be careful of how we treat that concept of addiction, and that we don't go down the road of substance addiction, that we don't go down the road of abuse addiction, whether that's at work or in the home. I think that police officers in general are subject to those ills, and it's important to feed your addiction in a way that's positive, and especially post-retirement, when that addiction of work is behind you, to find another way for that outlet. And I can speak personally for myself, it's cycling. I find that bike riding, road riding is the time where I do my best thinking. It's the time where I exhaust my body to the point where I'm not physically able to do anything stupid after that. And I find that it's also a great social outlet when you find the right group of people to then share that passion with. Like I have a group of state troopers that I ride with literally every Wednesday afternoon, and most of them are 15 years younger than I am, and they kick my ass every Wednesday afternoon. As flat as you think New Jersey is, here in the western portion of New Jersey, it is unbelievably hilly. Not like the Northern California area, but certainly our share. But yeah, exhausting your body through exercise to help feed that addiction. I think exercise is a good addiction to have, as long as you don't end up with a food addiction on top of it. But yeah, addiction is a very popular theme, and I think Chris hits on that as a job issue, and we have to make sure we channel it properly when that job portion of it is gone, because that's where I think people get in trouble, is when they start feeding that addiction with either alcohol or abuse or other substances, or negative things.
I just got to jump in, and I just got to say, Chris, I'm glad I didn't have to follow you, because I was pretty powerful, man, no doubt. Holy cow.
That was unbelievable.
Love you, man. Yeah.
So it never ceases to amaze me how I can listen to people's stories, and it becomes my story. It's like, and seeing things from a different lens, but seeing the same thing. I mean, like when Janet was talking about being the spouse of law enforcement and a dispatcher for law enforcement, that's like a double blessing and a double curse at the same time. And then for the rest of you, I mean, when you look at it through for the addict as a substance use counselor, the drug of choice is part of their person's identity. The drug of choice for me was a lot of them. I did a lot of chemical research. You wonder why my brain's so twisted. So, I was a chemical scientist of my own demise there. But substituting addictions is probably about the only way of compensating. Like for me, for cigarettes, I had to take them out of my pocket, but then there was an empty pocket there. So I grabbed the little Gideon New Testament and stuck it in my pocket. So anytime I'd reach, it was a substitute. Exercise is a substitute. And they can be a substitute that separates me from a reality, much like my work separated me from a reality too. That was an interesting thing. C.S. Lewis, a great storyteller, he says stories can help you get past those watchful dragons. So all of those filters that I can put up to keep that kind of stuff out and keep me inside, your stories sneak past those dragons that are setting up all the guards to not let you in. And to me, that was just getting past those watchful dragons. Now, but here's something I didn't hear in your stories. And it's very similar to the veteran experience, because with the coalition, I'm the co-champion of the Family Life Action Group. And we have a saying that spouses and families transition too. I mean, for many of us, our spouse's identity is our identity. And for family members, the children, my dad's a cop, or my mom, she's works with the Mounties, and that's their identity too. And I rarely hear conversation about their identity shifts and how that affects them. And I don't know if we started the Family Life Action Group with the coalition for that very reason, is because everybody was talking about the military, everybody was talking about the military family, everybody was talking about the veterans, and nearly no one was talking about the families post-discharge, after leaving the military. And we've worked hard, the caregivers for those, the ones that, there was nearly no conversation about that. And we percolated that to the top. Just whoever wants to jump in, if you want to kind of tell me about how that is for families of law enforcement. So there.
I'll just jump in there. It was tough when Les retired because of the situation, but and then I was still working for the force. But something really different happened to us. He retired and we moved and we bought an acreage. We were going to have a bed and breakfast this long before Airbnb. And 7 days after we moved in our house, we ended up temporary custody of 3 of our grandchildren, 3, 5, and 6. So we had bed, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, school, driving to school. My husband became the caregiver while I worked for the first couple of months, and then he went back to work. But now that he's retired from his second career and he's 74 now, I'll tell you the hardest thing about all of this, and it might be for other spouses too, as both being shift workers, I did a lot in the house when he wasn't home. And now he's home 24 hours a day. And that's something that we talk about too. Like I very seldom go shopping, and that now he goes and I vacuum. But it is a transition that is not an easy one. Our kids were already adults with children of their own when he retired and when I retired. But it is not easy to watch someone whose whole career was something he absolutely loved, would have kept going on forever, except for problems with management that left him angry. And I think that grief and loss, like Chris had mentioned about grief, there is totally grief and loss there we have to deal with. So,
Ron, I love that question. I think it's a really special one, and a one that needs to be asked more often and certainly answered more often. And I think everybody's perspective and experience is going to be unique to themselves. As far as our family was concerned, our plan was for me to retire and for my wife to then be able to have her career advance further. So that I left January 1st of 2020, and we all know what happened shortly after that. So we went into like this pandemic mode where, after 20 years of my career, where I missed most birthdays, holidays, sports events, everything else. All of a sudden we're living together, 5 of us in a house, asses to elbows for 18 months. And let's talk about transition. It went from never seeing anybody to just being together 24/7. It was kind of crazy. But as we kind of worked into the summer and stuff like that, I haven't missed a baseball game or a birthday or a holiday yet. Obviously, the pandemic issues aside, it's my kids have never been happier because I've literally made every single event in the last 18 months since I retired. And I've been there to help them with their schoolwork. I've been to every school function. I'm on the PTO at this point. And, they have seen such a positive change based on that transition. My wife and I definitely have had less of a positive experience than my kids have had. We've had to learn to live with each other again 24/7. And that is tough to do. You got to figure each other out again. And I think, who was it a couple of weeks ago? I think it was Vaughn that had said that when you retire out of uniform or transition out of uniform, that it's like coming home to a new place after 20 years of not having been there, and you become the new immigrant, like she was at the age of 4 when she came to this country for the first time. And I thought that was such an insightful thing. So when you're making that transition from your uniformed job into, I hate to call it retirement, none of us are really retired, we're going on to do something else. You're coming into a world that you didn't necessarily leave, and things are different when you get back. And whether that's a veteran coming home from the battlefield or from a police officer coming back into the house full time after being out of it most of the time. And I think that transition is going to be unique to everyone. And it's for everybody in the house, the individual plus their spouse and their children, even family. Like I went to family events that I hadn't been to in 20 years. Like, who's this guy? And that's a great question to ask, and I love that you did that.
There were some other questions that I held. You talked about the COVID. So a good friend of mine were having conversations. He said prior to COVID, most families were more like roommates than they were families. They all had their schedules and their activities. We drop them off, we go do other things, they come home in and out. And he said it forced us to be family in one thing. So that was something that came up. But the other thing is like the reservists, military reserves, or the guard, they're in the fight on Thursday and home on Friday, and police force and law enforcement deal with that every day. You're in the fight during the day, you come home, you're not in the fight, but yet you're still on call for the fight. And I tell you what, that is an intensity. Like in the military, you deploy, you come home, you do a stand down, you get some stuff there, you do a career, you get out, you transition. And though there are similarities, that's a uniqueness that I had not ever really contemplated with that. It's like go to war every day, come home from war every day. Kind of like, I don't even know if I'm saying it right. It's like, yeah. So anyways, any comments there?
I think you and I had talked about that a week or two ago, that same concept. And that is, I find that to be, that was one of the hardest parts, especially when you're coming home to say, so my kids are now 14, 12, and 7. And it's funny when we go out somewhere, whatever, somebody will curse on the ball field or whatever. And they're, oh, sorry, I didn't realize your 7-year-old daughter was there. Well, my wife sold condoms and vibrators for most of her the last 12 years at her job at working for the Trojan company. And so between her job and mine, there isn't anything that my kids hadn't heard at the dinner table. So there's nothing you can do to offend us when you're talking words. But yeah, so you got to compartmentalize work. So when you do come home, it's literally just stories coming from a third party perspective. And you don't want your kids hearing what, the nitty gritty of it. And you don't want your spouse having to hear the nitty gritty of it. So yeah, you compartmentalize that, it gets stuck back in your head, but that's what this tribe is all about. And that's why these connections are so important, is because you need some place to share that baggage with, especially someone that understands it, that's carrying that same baggage. Just like when you walk through the airport and you see somebody that has the same top flight suitcase you have, you're like, oh, that's so cool. It's the same thing with the internal baggage we have in our own heads. When someone else is carrying that baggage, you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. We get to share that. And just like, Jake and Brian at the beginning of this call were able to share that experience that they had working in the same unit. I just thought that was such a cool way to start this conversation. And that, two dudes that never knew each other know each other better than anybody else in their lives, probably. And that's why this forum is so important.
Well, Scott Mann talks about social capital, like this thing. I mean, if I were in an auditorium and everybody was law enforcement but me, and we couldn't say it, it wouldn't take long to where they would all know who isn't law enforcement. That would be me. That social capital.
It's in the eyes.
It's in the eyes. It's in everything we do. That 1,000-yard stare, the how you look over your shoulder regularly, and you scan the street, and all of those things are there, but it wouldn't take long. The same happens with doctors, with whatever the thing is. There's this social capital, and I just appreciate you letting us peek behind the curtain for all of you a little bit and see what some of that, the inside of some of that. The little man in Oz pulling all the levers. You pull back the curtain and you say, hey, really, it's just another human in there trying to pull levers to exist. So there you go.
I think if we can all get a peek behind that curtain in everybody's life, we'd have a lot less problems than we have. And, maybe to get to the media to shut up a little bit and stop, poking the bear all the time. I love that idea of the peek behind the curtain, because I think it's so important that we do all have an opportunity to not necessarily walk in somebody else's shoes, but see how they walk in their shoes. And, these conversations are important. I just wish people would have more of them outside of this forum with the people in their own communities when they walk through the supermarket or into a store or whatever.
I appreciate what you're saying, David. I was thinking the exact same thing. If everybody could have these conversations with law enforcement or anybody, you just can't help but really care about people when you see their stories and people are willing to share the stories. And so I think we all feel that closeness to one another because there has been so much vulnerability, so much. And I can't believe this, but it's already time for the next group. We have one of the directors and producers of Walk with Frank already on for the next group. But I want to invite everybody, come back next Thursday, every Thursday night at 6 p.m. We get to have these talks. We get to process. Sometimes it's just joking around. Dave Weiner's not here, so we're not telling jokes today. We miss him. But anyway, it's just a great place to come. Please come back Thursday night at 6 p.m. if this group resonates with you. And I cannot tell you, I have so much love for you guys, that you guys who have shared, who have put yourself out there, put your stories out there, your hearts. I just feel like your biggest fan over here. So I just thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who's joined this conversation too. Really appreciate
Sarah,
that.
Can I say one thing?
You bet.
So the only thing I want to say that a lot of guys hit on, but I came up with something that really connects with that term. You gotta know your weaknesses. Yes. Chris said it, a couple other guys said it, but those vulnerabilities, you got to be confident with those vulnerabilities. And once you can do that, literally you own it, and it doesn't seem like a weakness, it's a strength. So you flip it and make it powerful.
Jake,
I'm gonna write that down, Jake. Be confident with your vulnerability.
Jake, that is so powerful. You said that on one of the other talks in the past, and I cannot tell you how many times I have used that because you said it. There's something about that, hearing that confident vulnerability, different from being vulnerable when you're not quite ready for it. It's like telling your story when you're not quite ready to tell your story publicly. We do have to be careful. I don't want people to share their stories when I can see that they're not ready because they may regret it. I feel very protective of people like that. So I love that confident vulnerability. Great term. And Yeah, Jake, thank you for being here too. Just kind of hopping on in this other arena for you. Listen, lots of love to you all. Please come back. Stay on for the next call. It's going to be awesome. Janet, you and I are going to be bugs by the end of this day, right? Our eyeballs are going to be.
We're going to have so much to talk about. We have to plan that retreat, right, guys?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
I say we all head over to Michael Parker's place and get after it.
Yeah, that's great. That would be fun. Oh, okay. Well, listen, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off now.